പോളണ്ടിൽ എന്ത് സംഭവിച്ചു?
പോളണ്ടിനെ പറ്റി നീ ഒരു അക്ഷരം മിണ്ടരുത്.
Hello, Catherine.
Hi, Harsha.
So we were talking about terrorism in Canada and the United States and democracy and things like that. A lot of these movies that we're watching this week are, Kashmeeram is the only movie among this group that I've seen before. I'm familiar with Kashmeeram and Sarapancharam, the Jayan film. For the first time, I was watching Jayan movies. A lot of my life and my experience with Malayalam movies centers on the economic liberalization that happened in the late 80s and early 90s. And so to see movies that were made in a time period before that is so interesting. And, we're talking about things like emergency, where India wasn't a democratic country for a little bit. And some of these movies are made in that milieu. So it's really interesting to come to these movies as somebody who grew up knowing India as a democratic nation, but really kind of realizing now that I go back on some of the artwork made around that period that democracy in India is still very young, and to be able to see art made in a non-democratic context is always very interesting because movies are maybe more than any other form of popular culture are such a mirror to the way society looks at itself. And so we often get smuggling very ordinary goods as like a plot theme in these movies, in these action movies. So yeah, we are starting our second episode about action movies. And
after talking half an hour about Politics Back Channel, which is always the an interesting part of what we do, this week we're looking at two actors who are probably firm. Like we started with Mohanlal Mammootty, who do action films as part of their massy hero persona, but that's not all they do. But Jayan and Suresh Gopi, the two actors we're going to look at today, are sort of firmly considered primarily action stars.
Exactly. Suresh Gopi, just because of his longevity in the industry and, knock on wood, the longer life he's had than Jayan, has had time to be more than an action star. He's been a national award winner of playing a Kathakali dancer. So he has a much bigger career than his action movies. But what he became a star for were these police action movies, or military action movies. So we're going to start off with Kashmeeram, his 1994 release, which was actually also one of the first movies I remember actually watching. And Suresh Gopi imbued a very definite idea of masculinity from this movie that I always had a crush on him when I was a little kid. I was like, that's what a man should be. And so, I can go over the plot, or you can.
I'm at a huge disadvantage this week because 3 of the films we watched were not subtitled. One of the things I find really interesting with both of these actors is every time I look for something that's considered their best, that exemplifies what they did best, I either cannot find it at all, or if I can find it, there are no subtitles. So we're really in a place here where I'm at a disadvantage. So I will let you summarize.
Kashmeeram it's a very classic guy is sent to protect a family, and there's a terrorist because the family is politically prominent, and the matriarch of the family is a judge who's supposed to deliver a verdict on a very important case. So the Indian government sends Black Cats commandos to protect this family, and they aren't very grateful for the protection. They kind of talk down to him because they think he's like the muscle. And through the story, basically he proves his courage and nobility and saves their lives. And it's a very classic story. We have a million of these in Hollywood. Olympus Has Fallen, White House Down. All of these movies are basically, any movie where a Secret Service agent has to protect the president, this is very much in that vein. And Suresh Gopi, I feel like maybe this might have been the definite movie in his filmography that made him an action star. Don't quote me on that, but I feel like this might have been his. Yeah, I think this might have been if not the first movie where he gets to play a hit movie where he gets to play a policeman or a military guy. I see that he's had a few more IPS roles in 1993. So, Ekalavian City Police, Mafia. So, maybe I'm wrong about that, but this is maybe one of the movies that is most memorable in my mind from his filmography as the start of Suresh Gopi action star.
Well, and one of the things that struck me, again, I watched it with those subtitles, but one of the things that did strike me was that the family's constant pushing against him, trying to restrict their lives, is actually, something we're very much living through these days, where we have this constant tension with how do we best protect ourselves and what are the lines around that protection? How much freedom, in quotes, are we prepared to give up?
Yeah, it's a very massy movie. I think it's a fun movie to watch. I really enjoy Priya Raman in this. She plays kind of a spoiled brat daughter of the judge, who is played by the great actress Sharada. And it's very nice to see her playing this kind of, even though she much like her, she's also a bit, straining against Suresh Gopi's restrictions. She gets to play a very dignified role, and I enjoyed that about this movie as well. Seeing her in those judge outfits was very nice. I was like, that's a nice, good look for her. My very strong image of her is when she's very young, playing heroine roles to Prem Nazir, and then when she's older, playing a mother or a grandmother. So to get her in this part of her career is very nice.
And an important character too, a judge in this terrorism case.
Yes, it's absolutely not a disposable character. She's very core to this movie, and I feel like some of these early 90s movies, I'm the women, even in these movies that are soaked in patriarchy, I still feel like there's some presence of very strong female characters in a way that, compared to some of the movies that we're looking at prior to the 80s, we don't see that many female characters with as strong agencies as we're seeing in these early 90s movies. Also, I'll say the songs in this movie are really fun, and I think they're really enjoyable. Good soundtrack.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. And what I find fascinating is particularly in the choices we made for Suresh Gopi, again, limited by me, let's face it. But I do find, actually for both of these actors, I find, yes, there is some action, but there's long stretches in the film where there isn't a lot of action, and it's more, things are defined by their on-screen presence, how they physically hold themselves, their voice, their attitude. There's something about these two actors that, despite long stretches without action, you still feel this. I anyway had this real belief in them as action stars.
Yeah, I think with Suresh Gopi, there's a certain demeanor he adopts in his action movies that is very different than what he does in his more ordinary man roles. And mimicry artists have for decades now imitated that, like him shoving his his hand down and saying shit as a condensation of what his action man persona is. It's also so much English. He talks every time there's he has to convey anything like a punch dialogue, it's always in English. Those are kind of the classic Suresh Gopi tropes, and you can see that in this movie very clearly.
I found the climax really, there's where we get the action film. If you are an action fan, you got it in the last 10 or 15 minutes or so of this film, where Suresh Gopi and the soldiers under him are going after this terrorist base. And, things explode and things go flying. There's lots of red dust in the air. It's very artistically done.
Yeah, I was looking at the outfits, the Pashtun outfits, the Patani outfits that all the terrorists are wearing, and I'm like, this is such a, this movie could have been made in the post 9/11 period in America as well. It's extremely racist, and it makes all these political points that kind of uphold the Indian state as this big holy thing, and people who are in conflict with the Indian state as, the bad guys. We see this throughout the 90s because it's a constant issue. There's a great article that we'll link to in the podcast about Dil Se. Maybe you've read this research article about how in Dil Se, the South, as represented by Preeti Zinta, navigates itself with the center, i.e. Delhi, in a much more productive way than, the Northeast or Kashmir, parts of the country that are very much in armed conflict with the center. So that's one of the concerns you see addressed in this movie, and people from the South here are kind of putting themselves as part of the center. They're saying that there's no difference between the power center in Delhi and us as Malayali. So it's a very jingoistic film.
There were actually long stretches of Hindi in this film, which I understand a lot more than I do Malayalam. We've talked about the reasons for that too. So there were moments where I kind of was like, okay, I get what's going on now.
Well, I was thinking that kind of statement that we Malayalis are no different from the center of the country is, I don't know if Malayalam cinema can truthfully make a statement like that. Maybe somebody like Major Ravi, who is so much associated with military service, might make a film like that. But I don't think there's any sense in Malayalam cinema that the interests of Kerala or Malayalis is the same as the center at this point. And, the distance has grown so much in the almost 3 decades since this movie has come out. And it's very interesting to think about in retrospect, that it's a very specific time of national unity with the South in this movie. And Priya Raman, who is very beautiful, and I really enjoy her in this movie. She's very sassy and like a typical spoiled girl.
I admit to being slightly frustrated because I was like, the dude is here for your safety, damn it. But then, if they listened to him, there would be no movie. And yet, I do understand it on some level. I think if I were in the same situation, I would be pushing, maybe not as badly, but I would be pushing back too.
I think the motivations of all these characters in this movie are pretty understandable. Madhubal plays this sort of duplicitous character that Priya Raman's character Manasi is in love with. This might be one of his more memorable movies. These days, maybe most people know him as a director and a screenwriter more than as an actor. He's a fairly thoughtful guy, but he ends up playing these kind of creepy villain dudes in earlier movies. But yeah, I really enjoy him as a director and a writer. Another person who kind of, I feel, made his mold in Malayalam movies with this movie. Any other thoughts?
No, obviously you can feel me going silent. As I said, I'm at a real disadvantage today, particularly when we get to Prabhu. I'm like, okay, but we've chosen. Well, this was my choice, and this was me desperate for subtitles. I've written down that it's a 2017 film. It's a 2007 film directed by K. Madhu, Nadiya Kollappetta Rathri.
Yep, and actually, I would argue that even though this is technically a Suresh Gopi movie, that the main character is Kavya Madhavan's Nadiya.
Well, and that's another reason why I was kind of interested in it, because she plays a dual role, twin sisters, one of whom is a dancer, and Nadiya of the title, who's a sharpshooter. And we get into some of the reasons in the film, how she becomes a sharpshooter. But it's also kind of an Agatha Christie-esque setup where they're on this train, the Suparnika Express, and three attacks take place. One of them on Nadia's character, who is stabbed. She survives, but she's in hospital on life support. And there are 2 other characters, a dancer and a TV reporter, both women, who are actually killed on the train. And Suresh Gopi's character is an encounter specialist from the RACT, the Railway Anti-Criminal Task Force. Please tell me this doesn't really exist.
So an encounter specialist is like a glorified movie term. It does exist, but it's basically encounters or extrajudicial killings. So if they're specialists, they're a specialist for doing something extremely illegal. And I know there are some police officers who are known for that, basically breaking the law. But the rat, when the first, like, a police officer, Alexander, calls it a rat or cat or whatever, I was like, that's exactly what it sounds like. They keep saying they're from the rat. And it's a very silly name. The way they say it makes it sound like it's very impressive sounding, but it does sound like they're here from the rat.
Well, and it's supposed to sound impressive. But when you strip it down, it's like, dudes, you work for the railway and you're investigating a crime.
Yeah, so this is the railway police. It's really not as cool as they're making it sound. And the minute, they're in the train and they start explaining the limited number of characters that this story is gonna involve. I was like, this is so Agatha Christie. This is based on like an Agatha Christie novel, right? And then I looked it up, and obviously it was. So this has very classic Agatha Christie, limited number of suspects, and then like everybody kind of has a little version of their truth, and the hero Poirot in the original, Suresh Gopi from Wrecked in the movie, is his job is to basically uncover and make very pompous speeches.
Yeah, and this one is less about action and more about that style and that persona. Although he gets, an action hero introduction in the beginning when they're fighting with guys on a train.
And actually, probably Kavya Madhavan gets more action to do than Suresh Gopi does in this movie. The sort of climactic fight is actually got to do with her than him.
Yeah, again, one of the reasons that I found the film kind of interesting, although I put it on thinking, okay, it has subtitles and this will be good. And then I was watching it going, wait a minute, I've seen this before. And I had seen it unsubtitled on AsiaNet. And I was actually feeling pretty grateful that I had understood and remembered much of it without subtitles. So there's hope for me yet. One of the things I do like about this film is his character, Suresh Gopi's character, Sharafuddin, has colleagues that work with him. So he's got Sudarshan, played by Shammi Thilakan, and he's got Selvin, played by Jojo George.
A very young Jojo
Yes.
George. And the first scene where we see him, I was like looking towards Suresh Gopi's back. I was like, is that a skinny Jojo George? And he must have been in his 20s at this time this movie came out. And, it's 2007. It's fairly still a low period for Malayalam movies. And it's to see these actors who are going to have much bigger careers in, the next decade or so. It was kind of thrilling for me in that way.
Yeah, and the first time I didn't know who he was, because this was probably about 10 years ago when I would have seen it on AsiaNet the first time. But this time I was like, whoa! Look, so we get our joys in some of these films in the oddest corners.
And you get Madhubal playing another rando creep in this movie as well. And I also did the same thing. I was like, is that a shaven Madhubal? I've never seen him without a beard. Yeah, he's one of this group of 4 doctors who are in one of the compartments in their train that, basically they have to come up with their own version of the truth about what happened that night. Any other thoughts about this movie? I feel like saying that this is an Agatha Christie movie kind of encapsulates everything I felt about it. There's a lot of tropes. You kind of have very familiar beats. No songs as far as I can remember. Was there a song?
There might have been one. It would have been one at the most, but yeah, it's not like you're not going here for songs. But the reason I did want to watch it was because that you've got, the female actor as having some of the action in this, which rarely happens.
Yes, absolutely. And I was surprised to see this in Kavya Madhavan's filmography. I think she's so synonymous with these dopey crying female characters in Malayalam movies that to see her playing a character with age, and not in a movie like Kadama where that was very I'm gonna do this as bait for an award. To see her playing someone villainous, see her playing somebody who is pushing the story forward is very interesting. I don't think she's a very good actress even in this. There's a lot of histrionics going on, but it's still valuable to see her play a somewhat more manipulative character, because when she's playing the not hysterical scenes, I think she has a real vibe of malevolence that I enjoyed.
Well, and she's not the only one engaging in histrionics in this film. You know, there are a lot of, especially among the minor characters, who I'm like, oh, I don't have the patience for you today. So she's not alone in that, and it's not, you know, a fault to her that the whole film has been directed that way. But yeah, I mean, again, you know, I was there more for her than I was for Suresh Gopi, to be quite honest.
Yeah, and this is in a period of Suresh Gopi's career when he's a little bit jowlier and like he's a little chunkier, and it feels like he's trying to recapture his glory days of the '90s. That's what a little bit of what this movie feels like, where we're not supposed to find the appeal of him from this movie. We're supposed to like recall our affection for him from older movies and give him the benefit of the doubt in this movie.
One of the questions I had was, is there a callback to Kashmeeram in this? Because I'm going to yell spoilers again. As we discover how he's related to Kavya Madhavan's character, the encounter specialist comes in. He's wearing the same outfit as he is in Kashmeeram, the black. I wondered if that's a callback or if that's just I'm reading too much.
So Suresh Gopi has so that black outfit is a black cat is the commando outfit, and he's played black cats a few times at this point, and I think they're all like kind of stemming from Kashmeeram. So yes and no, I guess, is my answer.
So it wouldn't have been unexpected for his career, but I might be reading a little too much into it.
Yeah, I feel like he's like I think he was even in a movie called Black Cat. So I think it's part of his IPS Black Cat roles that he, just like Mohila playing a character called Sunny is what we expect.
Okay, the one thing I do want to mention is Siddiq.
And his wig. I saw you tweeting about it.
See, I have this theory about Siddiq and his wigs. If he doesn't wear a wig, it's usually the film is really good. And the quality of the film will be reflected in how bad his wig is.
To be honest, this wig was so bad, and I don't think the movie was as bad as the wig.
So it falls down a little bit. Maybe it's just wearing a wig or not wearing a wig. But it's like, that wig was so bad.
I feel like he showed up to get, do English dialogue trading with Suresh Gopi and, to wear that bad wig. I was like, why? Why was this a thing in the 2000s? There's no justification for it. And Malayalam films have a terrible history with actors wearing wigs. Every time Prithviraj wears a wig, I'm like, man, who did that to you? Why didn't anybody say that looks terrible? In Urami, in the Ninde Moideen, good movies, terrible wigs. So yeah, I mean, there's something going on in the wig department in Malayalam movies that makes them so outrageous. And you've seen Mammootty wearing terrible wigs too.
Oh God, yes.
Anytime somebody wears a auburn colored wig, it's about to get terrible.
You have to give more money to your wig department. That's what it boils down to. Or you have to stop annoying your wig department.
So I'm thinking of all the movies where Siddiq doesn't wear a wig. I'm thinking of Ustad Hotel, and I'm like, yeah, you're right, Catherine. Those movies, because they're not here to play any games with you. They're this is a middle-aged man. He has no hair. It's fine. That's what we hired him for, and stuff. Whatever. He was playing I think he was a Hariharan type. That's what he was playing with the long hair and the white outfits. I think he was supposed to be like Hariharan, ghazal singer.
Well, he was a musician.
Yeah. So I think that's the kind of character. Maybe that's what the wig was about. But it could have been a nicer wig still. Even Hariharan's natural hair isn't that ratty looking.
Oh dear. On that note, let's turn to our second actor today.
The late Jayan, who I actually have not seen very many movies of. I've never seen a movie of his. I am familiar with him because of the 2000s mimicry craze for him. And the stance he does where he like spreads his arms like his entire wingspan. And I thought that was like a joke or like he might have done it in one movie, but no, he actually does that like in all his fight scenes where he like spreads his arms wide, and it's unclear to me why that's the case. And obviously I know him from his punch dialogues, the "We are not beggars, we are coolies," and "Alavladi Shaji." That's the other one I know. So yeah, the first movie we're gonna talk about is actually is once again not so much a Jayan movie as it is a Prem Nazir movie. This is the first Prem Nazir movie that we're talking about.
And unfortunately, actually, let me take a little bit of a step back because, I had been watching Malayalam films for about 5 or 6 years before Jayan's name ever came up. And I think it was on one of these news report things, remembering the actor, blah, 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 blah. And I started to go and look, and I went, like, if you look at his Wikipedia page, that they mention he was called the first action star of Malayalam cinema, regarded as the first action hero. And I went, where is this dude? And I went looking for films. And at that point, I could find nothing. And then when I was reminded of him again when Katapanayela Ritvik Roshan came out, because Siddiq, again, plays a character who is a huge fan of him. And that's when I started looking again. And at that point, there was a little more information about him. And then almost a year ago, November 2020, there was a news article about Angadi that S Cube Films, who have been via their YouTube channel, have been sort of, I won't say restoring because it's not true restoration, but they've been upgrading the quality of various prints that they hold the rights to and putting them online. And they did a big deal. They did a trailer for it. They released the "We are not beggars, we are coolies" dialogue. And they were going to put Angadi on their YouTube channel, and then they didn't. So I don't know what happened to it, because I would love to see this film. But sort of that's how I've ended up coming to him. And then when I started getting access to a lot of Prem Nazir films via places like Hotstar, there was Jayan. So that's the roundabout way of getting to the film we're going to talk to, Prabhu. Again, I watched it without subtitles, so I'll let you do the summary.
Prabhu is a very masala plotline about a lost son and family revenge. That they start off with the hero when he's a little boy, and his father dies, and the most part of the story is kind of about him finding out who he is and getting revenge on the man who killed his father. And the little boy grows up to be Prem Nazir, and Jayan's character is kind of a associate of the villain who gets turned around to Prem Nazir's side. And so Prabhu is played by Prem Nazir, and Jayan's character is called Vishwan. There is also Seema, who plays Prabhu's love interest / his mother's foster daughter. There's a lot of complicated family connections in this movie. Jayan's mother ends up being somebody that also the villain kills at the beginning of the movie. So there's this is actually also a gangster film, so there's a certain amount of smuggling and like land mafia things going on. And basically it's about how these two heroes gang up to save the day against the villain. And their mom is played by Kavya Madhavan, who is like 40 years younger than Prem Nazir, probably. Kavya Madhavan.
I know, the minute he called her mother, I went, wait, what? Because I had missed that bit. I couldn't figure out who he was without the subtitles. But I was like, wait, she's your mother?
Kavya Madhavan has been playing mother to like heroes since she was apparently 19 or 20. And I was like, the audacity of these men to cast her as, and like when I first saw her in the early scenes, where the hero's still a young boy and she's his mother, I was like, oh my God, she's there she is, young Kavya Madhavan. She looks so cute. I hope she's the sister or something. No, she turns out to be his mother. Yeah, she's really
gorgeous.
Beautiful.
I was like, oh, I mean, she's beautiful as an older woman too, but boy, she was really lovely.
I don't understand why she didn't get cast for heroine roles instead of mother roles, because I went back to read her Wikipedia, and it says like she started playing mother to heroes since she was 20. And maybe it's just, she didn't want to like have to play the wife of like these older dudes. Maybe there's some benefit to just being the mother. You don't have to be sexualized like the heroine is. Seema is extremely sexualized in this movie, which makes sense. She plays a bar dancer and like the mole of the villain, but she's also claims that she's still very chaste to her brother when he goes after her for being a bar dancer. But yeah, she basically kind of tries to first get Prabhu to give up something that her villain boss has an interest in, but then he's kind to her despite her holding a gun to him, so she takes a liking to him. And then there's a bunch more songs where she does sexy dances too. And this is maybe the first time I feel like I've seen Prem Nazir dance. Like he and Seema do a full-on like group dance with background dancers, and I was like, that's something I've never seen. And I think this, the kind of like group dancing might be since the advent of color cinema, so it kind of makes sense that Prem Nazir didn't do it in his earlier films. I just never imagined him dancing in my life. So he's like Mammootty. He's not a dancing actor.
Exactly. That stood out for me as well. I think it's really unfortunate that this is the first Prem Nazir film we're talking about because, I mean, he's what, in his early 50s at this point. And, I mean, there's the wig.
Oh, yeah, there's a huge wig. It's very tall. But it's not as bad as Siddiq's wig. Whatever technology was in the 1978 or whatever this movie was made in, it was a lot better than Siddiq's wig.
Because I love some of his films from the 60s, particularly where he's paired with Sheela. Because they're like, those 60 films that are so naive and sweet and funny and fluffy and, the plots are really insubstantial. And I love that. I think those are the films I like to watch sort of in between because they just cheer me up. And I think it's unfortunate to see him at this stage, and we've talked about Mohanlal and Mammootty, and we talked about actors aging, and we're seeing this again in this film because to have him, and truthfully the only place you're going to find Jayan films with subtitles are going to be these films where he starred alongside Prem Nazir in the 70s. So I think it's and I think it's unfortunate for Prem Nazir as well, because when you look at Jayan in this film,
he's young, he's still vibrant, and so the action scenes, it's very clear to see that Jayan was very famous for doing his own stunts. So he's like, you can see his face in the shots where he's doing stunts, and Prem Nazir is just like flailing his arms to beat people, and like they're just standing there and like do a circle every time he hits them.
And it's obvious when he has to do anything more than that it's a stunt double. Like, I don't think I've ever seen a film in which he's done his own stunts beyond the arm flailing. Which, I mean, that's okay for me up to a point. But it's really, when you see what Jayan is doing, and again, coming back to what I said about Suresh Gopi, I mean, here you have another actor with a definite demeanor, a definite screen presence. I find him very charismatic to watch, even when he's given a smaller role alongside somebody like Prem Nazir. Like, they do that thing in the beginning. He has sort of a low budget Mission Impossible thing to steal the statue, and like even though it was so corny, I was actually glued to the screen watching him do it. Like, he was very invested in that.
I think because I knew that he does his own action scenes, I was also looking to see like, oh, is he the one climbing the rope? And it was, because the shots were like of him climbing up. And I mean, unfortunately, he passes away later because he does his own stunts and he's so committed to doing his own stunts. And I think that's something he brings real value to in this movie is the action part of this movie, because he's his character doesn't really need to be there. Like, there's nothing that in the plot that requires him to be there. This movie could have entirely been like Prabhu doing the same thing. But I think they we see this even in Mammootty Mohanlal movies of the 2000s. They always add a younger hero to like do the dancing and like the like action part of it, because like the main hero can't bend his knee to like even give a good kick. So that's the role Jayan serves in this. Yes, he's a second hero in this, and he kind of has a love interest, but she gets married and goes away, so he doesn't even get to really romance as much as Prem Nazir does, and Prem Nazir does a lot of romancing in this movie, which is kind of his forte.
It is, but again, it's this point where the heroines are now getting younger and
Yes.
younger, and the actress playing his mother is 20 years younger than he is. I find that incredibly sad because I said, like, I enjoy his movies from the 60s. The movies from the 60s, I can see, he's kind of got that matinee idol look, and I could see why he was popular. I always get sad when I see sort of people at this point in their career, but it also has me asking the question. I mean, and here's a question we cannot answer: like, what would have happened if Jayan had survived? That the accident where he was doing the stunt for his film.
It's so interesting to think because his career was so short, less than a decade, really. And what kind of actor would he have been in new generation movies? Like how would our directors today have reinvented him, as they've reinvented, Suresh Gopi in newer movies. The rough guy getting soft type roles. I will say this about Jayan, that when he plays romance, like when he's imitated in mimicry, like his romance often has like a lascivious tinge to it. It's not like a pure Prem Nazir type romance, right? And so that is something like that I felt this movie didn't. I was like, oh, that's like a different version of Jayan than I've seen in romance before. And Prem Nazir, even though I've seen movies of him in the past, whenever he does his, like, he folds his hand while he's talking to a woman, it always like feels like Jairam is imitating him rather than I'm watching him. And I think so much of my experience of this movie was colored by the people who have imitated them in my lifetime. And I kept waiting for Prem Nazir to like give Seema a little pat on her butt like Jairam always does in his imitation of him. So, in that way, this movie was bringing alive of the tropes.
One of the things that I found when I was reading, though, was this idea that when Jayan died, people did feel there was suddenly this huge gap in the industry and tried to fill it with imitators. One of the things I read, and I don't know if it's true or not, was that one of the people they tried to fill the gap in was a very early Mammootty.
Oh, interesting. So, like, doing action?
Yeah, I couldn't find any more than that brief reference, but it was like, and when Mammootty was really early in films using Sajjan instead of his own name, that's an idea that kind of fascinates me. I'm not sure if that's true, but I can see that there was suddenly this gap that people wanted to fill and didn't know how to fill.
Yeah, absolutely. And, that's kind of the role he's playing in this movie, too. Like, we're kind of at the twilight of Prem Nazir, and, like, they're trying to find, like, the next hero who can take it forward. And I'm sure it was such a shock to the industry to have the person who's supposed to be the torchbearer of that period, die in this very tragic accident. And it kind of makes sense, all the kind of ghost of Elvis type stories that are around Jay, and that he's still alive, living in America or something like that. And also the definite difference in style between movies we've seen even in the early 80s to this movie. So much is still on a sound stage. We see like paintings of like coconut palms in the background that it's supposed to represent the neighborhood. And the acting is less stylized in this than the movie we're going to talk about next. But like you see people talking in a very artificial way that's still very like staged, like from the theater drama world. Prem Nazir famously has a very artificial way of delivering dialogues that comes from his theater background, and there's a little bit of that in this movie too.
That was actually something I was talking with Rob about last night, was this. I wouldn't necessarily recommend a Prem Nazir film to someone who doesn't have a lot of experience with old film, and that's including like Hollywood film, where you do have these people coming out of theatrical backgrounds, and you don't have yet the emergence of real naturalistic acting. I find them fun anyway, despite that. But it is a style in acting that if you're not familiar with it, you might find off-putting because it's very formal.
And Jose Prakash plays the villain in this, and Jose Prakash is kind of famous for playing villains in Malayalam movies. My sister-in-law actually went to college with his grandson, and so every time he grew a mustache, everybody would yell, "There goes Jose Prakash!" So he's such a familiar face that even people now who were very recently in college are very familiar with him, and so he's playing once again to type. He's got a lascivious note to him as well. He's a very doting father also in this movie. Yeah, so this movie is like a bundle of familiarity in a lot of ways.
So let's move on to the last film.
Yes, Sarapancharam. If you watch a little bit of this, you begin to think, just like the Nadiya feels like an Agatha Christie movie, you immediately think, this is based on some 19th century European novel, isn't it? And it is based on Lady Chatterley's Lover, but it could be The Awakening. This could be like Madame Bovary. It could be any of those movies where a rich young woman cheats, which is what basically the crux of this movie is. Jayan plays the lover, and Sheela plays Lady Chatterley. And the movie, it has more artistic merit, I will say, than Prabhu necessarily does, but Jayan just hams it up in this movie. Just absolutely. He is just playing a lascivious creep throughout.
I hate to say I loved it, but I did. Although this is one actually I would love to have with subtitles and do a write-up, but also because it was a familiar story, I understood a lot more of what was going on. What I really loved sort of in the first part of the film is, the idea that it's dealing with a female gaze, and it's dealing with a woman who, her husband is impotent, and she turns to the stable boy for, physical satisfaction. Unfortunately, she gets punished for it, and that's sort of the back half of the film, where she ends up marrying Jayan's character, and he turns out to have only been there for the money.
Yeah, there's so many scenes in the first half where Sheila's just staring at him lustfully from her balcony while he famously there's that scene that I'm sure a lot of people have seen of him folding his back muscles as he rubs down the horse in very tiny shorts. The hem lengths of this movie was astounding. I was like, I have never seen such tiny shorts and tiny skirts in Malayalam movies.
And a lot of cleavage
and a
shots.
lot of cleavage shots. This is a very horny movie.
Yeah, I was actually really surprised by it. And it's very, you talk about Jayan hamming it up, but it's also this idea, and it's not an action movie until right at the very end, really, where we get some action thrown in, but it's this action star idea of a kind of a heightened masculinity, a kind of a man's man. He's arrogant, he's physical. So it's sort of interesting to see that transferred into a very non-action film.
Yes, he's into hunting. The gun is a constant, it's definitely a Chekhov's gun thing happening in this movie. Horses, the horse is literally a stand-in for Jayan's character. So every time his stepdaughter beats up on a horse or a picture of a horse, it's because she's angry at him. And so, we have the tying masculinity to virility to, like a stallion, these kind of turns of phrase that we have. And so he represents that kind of toxic masculine ideal that we often see 19th and early 20th century heroines in European literature get drawn to, away from their boring, steady husbands. And so that is kind of what happens to Sheila's character, and she as soon as she finds out that he's cheating on her, he's spending her money however he likes, he is having his mistresses over at the house where her daughter from her first husband lives, so she doesn't feel like it's a good place for her daughter, so she sends her away to boarding school. The child grows up extremely resentful of her mother and her stepfather. and she's out partying with her boyfriend and her male friends, which includes Shankar. Shankar plays one.
Yes, I wrote that.
Shankar plays one of his friends. I was kind of hoping that Ramesh was also somebody the boyfriend was also played by somebody I know, but no, Shankar was in the background, and I was like, it's really nice to see actors in their early roles, and so once again, a boy who has vengeance to seek comes back into their life and tries to take out Jayan. But at the end of the day, it's still the female characters who drive the story, and the Chekhov's gun goes off in, spoiler alert, Sheila's hands, because she's the one who brought this problem into their lives, and she's the one who's going to take it out.
Yeah, and there's also a very, I don't even know how to talk about it. When Jayan's character confronts the young man who the daughter is interested in.
It's extremely homoerotic. That's what you're talking.
Well, yeah, I know. Rob was actually watching at this point with me, and they start ripping their shirts off, and I'm like, and he was like, "What?" I'm left speechless by this particular scene where, if you're going to have a man-to-man fight, you have to take your shirts off and go at it.
As I said, this is a very horny movie. And on all sides, they're the gaze objectifies everybody, basically. Yeah, I was watching it going, this is something I've never seen in Malayalam movies before. And that horse scene also gets made fun of a lot. It gets played as a desperate housewife situation, right? But in the movie, it's very serious. Her gaze and her desires are taken very seriously. And I respect that about this movie. Yes, she gets punished, but it doesn't feel like a lot of people except her daughter blame her for cheating. I mean, her brother also blames her, but it doesn't feel like the servants judge her that much. It just feels like they sympathize with her.
Yeah, no, it was, despite whatever you might think about some of it, it is interesting to consider as a film.
Yeah. Have you ever seen the Madame Bovary adaptation with Shah Rukh Khan?
No.
I think it might be from, I think it's definitely a...
Is that Maya Memsab?
Yes, Maya Memsab, yes.
Oh, no, I have not seen it, but I know of it.
Okay, yeah.
There are lots of pictures of Shah Rukh Khan out there on the internet that I don't know if they're actually from that film or what, but...
Yeah, so I kind of wanted, I was thinking of going back and watching it to see how it treats female sexuality versus, this movie, because... Yes, they're different they're different stories, they're adapted from, but in my mind, they're all AP English books about women cheating. So inevitably, the woman has to pay for her, going with her desire. So I think that is a worthy sidebar to if anybody ever wants to look at another movie.
I'm just sort of trying to think how we can sum up right now. Because it's challenging. I think the biggest challenge is when you have the two names who are most associated with action in Malayalam cinema, how little of their actual action is available to someone beyond the diaspora, to someone beyond a Malayalam audience, basically.
I think there's a big gap that the industry needs to fill. I hope, we get some new businesses that come up that, as you said, the channel that's pseudo restoring the movies. I think there's a lot of room for these movies to be restored. My only thing is every time you look for these movies, they always show the quote unquote naughtiest part of the movie in the screenshot, and I'm and you kind of don't want to click on it because I don't want that to come up on my YouTube history, and that is my only issue. I wish there were channels and vendors who are treating this movie as art, as not as just check out the horniest clips from your youth.
Yeah. That turned up a lot when I was searching for clips from this film to see if I could share some, and people share the things that are maybe the most shocking about the film, and they're certainly shocking in context, but they're not. Yes. In that context, they're not what these people are making out they are.
Exactly. I think that's what I learned, because I was kind of because I knew about that like horse cleaning scene. I was like, what is this movie gonna be like? And it's a lot more than that. The most shocking like bits you get on YouTube. It's definitely about sexuality. It's as I said, but it's a full story. And if you were going to the movie theaters in that period, you would have gotten the whole story. You wouldn't have just gotten like the sari barely covering your chest shots that I think probably the movie posters and YouTube screenshots portray. So I would say that take these movies. I think they're part of Malayalam cinema's heritage, and I really encourage people to check them out as part of, Malayalam cinema's continuing dialogue with the society it's part of, and think about what these movies represent and the time period it came from. And especially seeing Sheela in this kind of role when all I've seen her is in those very innocent 60s movies as the woman who is slurred against, but she's completely innocent. See her playing a character who's not so innocent was fascinating.
Yeah, for me too. Because again, I go back to those early films with Prem Nazir, which are very cute and very sweet for the most part. And I think she hasn't done a lot of work lately, but the few bits she's done, I've seen her as a much more interesting actress than I would have expected, having seen those films from the 60s. So I agree. This is a really interesting role for her, and I would almost watch this more for her than for Jayan.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, on a theme where we're talking about him, but
no, coming back to it, it's interesting to me how much more sexuality is laced into movies in the 70s and 80s than I think even they are now.
No, that's very true. That's very true.
It's surprising to me because I did not watch these movies growing up that Malayalam cinema has a much more. I mean, you do know about like Tuvana Tumbigal and all these other movies, but they're held up as Padmarajan and like art films, and like yes, they talk about like human sexuality, but they're art. And to see these movies that have such a like erotic undertone I'm like a little shocked. It's like finding out, your parents are having sex, that kind of thing. Like, like it's oh my God, I'm scandalized.
Truthfully, I was a little bit, but I think I've become so inured to it, watching films where this is not happening for the most part.
And I mean, the Jayan movies we're taking as a whole are probably like we're talking a little bit more about their erotic undertone than I don't think Suresh Gopi's movies have that much of an erotic undertone. It's definitely about the English dialogues with him. Yeah, I wonder if movies, like, I wonder if people in the 70s ever took their family to see this movie. Because, we historically have not had much of a separation in terms of what's a movie that you can go see with the whole family versus, maybe this is just for the adults. And I'm wondering if, like, people went to see Sarapancharam in the theaters with their family and they were like, oh, this is not what we thought it was going to be.
We were expecting a different kind of action. Oh dear.
Maybe I'll ask. I mean, like, my parents were alive in this time. My mom never watched movies growing up. Syrian Christians had a very, like, films are sinful type attitude, and I think it took a while into the 70s and 80s for them to not feel like movies are a source of sin.
We went from action heroes to morality tales.
Yeah, yes, absolutely. Sharada is definitely a morality tale.
So that kind of sums up what we've done today. And next time, we're going to take a leap into the future.
Yes, to very, I would say, Malayalam industry's latest best attempt at doing action, which probably is still not that great. But, we're on this path doing a very niche genre in an industry that's not known for it, and it's been an interesting journey.
It has. So maybe we'll leave it there and hope people will come back next time to learn more.
Absolutely.
Thanks for listening to the Polandine Patti podcast.
If you like what you're hearing, remember to come back for our next episode and share our podcast with your friends.
If you'd like to connect with us, you can email us at polandinapatti@gmail.com or reach out to us on our Twitter feed at polandinapatti. See you next time.